expect that needs to be done to make this happen. So again, we're looking at, hopefully as you went through and looked at those goals, we're making sure that you can at least achieve one or more of those goals. Obviously, the more goals that you can touch on as you go through, the better chance you're going to have of a successful proposal. I said there's 34 million that the deadline was August, so that first round is done and closed. 3 more rounds available. Start thinking about what you might see, and if you're not successful this round, that doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity to refine. Please take to heart any feedback that you're given, refine, iterate, and come back. There'll still be plenty of opportunities to come back and take advantage of this really amazing opportunity to get a hold of funding to tackle these issues we're talking about. And so with that, I'm going to close with who I am, which I probably should have started out with who I am, but I'll end with who I am because I can linger on this slide longer without feeling like I'm holding anybody up. That's all my contact information. Construction Technology Program Manager for Federal Highway Administration, also the UAS Program Manager, so you'll hear a lot from me again if you're in any of the UAS tracks. Feel free to send me an email, call me. I have 2 websites up there that contains most of the things that we know, and the information we discussed will all be up there as well. And with that, I think I'm right at my 20 minutes, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Let's give James a big round of applause.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next up, we have the BIM for Bridges and Infrastructure. That was a tongue tie there. Update. We've got Cheryl Hirsch-Simmons and Alexa Mitchell. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Oops, sorry. We appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund. My name is Cheryl Hirsch, and I'm the Chief Structural Engineer for the Utah Department of Transportation. I sit on several AASHTO committees that are involved in construction, technology, data standardization. And with me is Alexa Mitchell, who is doing the hard work on the pooled fund. She's with HDR. And we'll have her introduce herself a little more as we get into it. So we're going to be tag teaming this presentation in order to provide input from both HDR, again, who's been doing the work, and a DOT involved in reviewing, questioning, and guiding the work. So today I'll start off by providing an overview of the Phase 1 of the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund, including the objectives and accomplishments. I'll then pass it over to Alexa to talk about what we've learned with respect to the process of creating an open BIM standard and what it means to have a standard in terms of data exchanges. I'll then follow up with an overview of where the Phase 1 pooled fund will be ending, and we're going to be starting a Phase 2, so talking about what we're looking to accomplish there, as well as provide some highlights of how the BIM for Bridges and the BIM for Infrastructural pooled funds relate to each other. And if time allows, we'll have some time for questions. So with that, I'll kick it off. So the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund has participation from 24 states, plus FHWA. The Pooled Fund project website has this roadmap, and the website is bimforbridgesus.com. And it shows in this roadmap activities dating back to 2004, as well as key current and future efforts. The primary goal for the pooled fund was to establish a standard for bridge semantic and geometric information exchanges. It sought to leverage previous international efforts in order to create US standards for bridge. And if you look at this blow up, it shows specifically this project began in 2018. We're currently in year 5 of the 5-year effort. And key milestones associated with the pooled fund are shown in green, with future efforts and ongoing efforts shown in red. From the beginning, there were 4 primary working groups that were established: research, return on investment, the IFC development, communication, and then education and engagement. Members of the pooled fund volunteered for different working groups in order to provide feedback and review the developed products. The first couple of years of the project were a discovery period, and this 5th year, the main focus of the project is IFC development, and that's shown in yellow. This is the technical work that is fundamental to enabling IFC exports and imports in bridge software for conventional bridges. You know, early on in the project, the decision was made to focus on the design to construction information exchange. It was also determined that the primary focus would be on conventional workhorse bridges. In retrospect, these decisions were fundamental in providing a narrower focus from which to systematically develop a process of creating an open BIM standard. As a result, we now have a template for a repeatable process to create standards for other data exchanges. So this slide's a bit overwhelming, but it shows the impressive amount of work that's been done. And all of the products are interrelated and help inform next steps. Of particular note, shown in that blue color, is the IDM, or the Information Delivery Manual, which is the human readable file that has mapping to the computer readable set of files. The other critical pieces are the development of the US Bridge Data Dictionary, which provides definitions and identifies critical synonyms for each element. And then also the development of the unit test suite instructions, which allow the software developers to perform implementation testing and validation of IFC-based exchange requirements. Alexa will delve more into the significance of these and having an AASHTO IDM standard, what it takes and what it means.
Thanks, Cheryl, and I'm gonna stand over here, I think. So you saw the amount of work that we've done in the last 5 years, so I thought that we take a little bit of time to walk you through what we believe are the foundational steps for creating another standard similar to this one. So I like to say that we narrowed it down to 4 foundational steps. One of them was starting with the work that other people did, right? We didn't start from scratch. FHWA has invested a lot of money into research that we were able to use. So there was a bridge data lifecycle that was created under a previous research, and we took that and updated it to confirm that the data exchanges that we wanted to look at and prioritize for developing an open BIM standard. Once we had a good view of all the different data exchanges, then we moved to establishing the data exchange of interest, which is what Cheryl mentioned, that design to construction model contract from that process map. And I'll show you here in a little bit illustratively what that looks like. Once we knew what we were dealing with, then we could actually start defining terms, relationships, and the data structure that was needed to enable the software tools, which was the 4th step, which is creating those software tools, working with the software vendors, and we have incredible participation from major vendors and vendors that don't even do model authoring today. So to create what we will need in terms of the IFC for that 3 schema, and using international standards to create the products out of this project. So if we move forward we took a very complicated diagram of the data lifecycle for a bridge, and kind of illustrate it in a little bit more friendly format. This, what I'm showing on the screen, is interactive PDF that you can find in the U.S. Bridges website. And we identified only the digital exchanges as they relate to BIM, right? And so we came up with those green items that you see on the screen, the little icons, and we identified 19. Number 11 is the one that we focus on because that was the one that was, you know, ready to go, or the low-hanging fruit and what we thought the industry was ready for. So we blow it up. We call that the contract deliverable, the construction contract model. So the other thing that we did in that process map, as you put your cursor on these items, you will have these pop-ups, right? So we define each of the processes as what we believe we defined as, of course, as the construction contract model as well. And as you see here, we also define all the actors that are involved in that life cycle, including their roles and responsibilities, because we needed to understand who produces information and who uses information, right? Another important piece of that interactive map is that for each of those 19 digital exchanges, we also define some detailed information about it. For this construction contract model, we are focusing on the bidding, and the creator is going to be the structural engineer or the designer, and the intended user is the contractor, right? So we knew those were the actors involved in this particular data exchange, and what we defined it was for the purpose of contractor cost estimating, construction planning, and detailing, right? So we needed to provide a contract model that had enough information that a contractor could bid and execute construction, which includes initiation of fabrication. I want to reiterate that we focused on one data exchange this one time. You saw there were 19, so it's complicated, but we really wanted to focus here and try to figure out that recipe so that we could replicate it over and over. A piece of what I consider major milestone is the IDM. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time explaining why I think this is such a major milestone. The IDM was balloted and approved in June of 22 at the Committee on Bridges and Structures annual meeting as a guide specification. And it was published by AASHTO in January of 23. What this information delivery manual is, if you really open it and look at it, is a list of tables that gives you all the different model objects that need to be included in a bridge model for the purpose of construction, bidding, and execution. Along with each of those model elements, there is property sets that have been identified. So those information requirements that you heard us talk about in the panel discussion earlier, we defined what that was. Let's agree, these are the common things. If you don't want to use them, that's fine, but we all agree that these are the properties that are going to be attached to this particular model element, or could be attached to this model element. And then all of the different properties. So we agreed, and this took a long time in talking with bridge engineers and the people who actually develop projects on what we were going to call these things. So, and it is significant. It is a significant major milestone because it sends a very clear signal to the supply chain that we mean business, right? That we all agree on the one thing, and so each of the vendors in this room and outside actually have agreement from all 50 states that this is the way that I would like for you to configure my software. That's a big deal, guys. It's a huge deal. So it was very important, and we took great pride in that. The other thing was, of course, what I told you, that IDM was a human-readable document, you know, a list of tables. The next step was to convert it into computer-readable files so that the software can do its thing, right? So that we can actually exchange information with one another. One of it was the data dictionary, and we talked about data dictionary. one of the things we spent a lot of time on was defining the terms based on authoritative information. What is the source of that definition? And it was cited so that we know the authoritative area where it came from. The other thing that we did was synonyms. This is how we can all agree to call the one thing, but you call it something else in your state, right? So we did that. And then the other thing that once we had all those things figured out, we started doing a relationship mapping, and that is important for the exchange itself, for the Open BIM standard. And so we mapped every item on the data dictionary to IFC 4.3 entities, which is the standard that we're using, along with our properties and their relationships with one another. And then at the end, we're going to have this thing called the Information Delivery Specification, or IDS. It's a file that you're going to be able to upload to your software and validate that your model had all those model elements mapped correctly, the properties that are supposed to be in there were in there, and so on. It will not check the values, but it will validate that the right entities were mapped and the right properties were populated. All right, so why did I go through all that, and why is this important, and what does this mean for the future of data exchanges? We're setting the framework. It took us a long time, and it won't take this long next time around. But what is important to understand is that we live in an ecosystem, that we are relying on international data exchange standards that are going to be maintained by somebody else, because I heard a lot of you saying we don't have enough people to do what we do today, so let's leverage what other people do, right? So we're looking at the IFC 4.3 schema, something that is called base MVDs, reference view, alignment-based reference view. We can have a whole conversation about that over beer another time. And then something that's really important for the project is the certification and validation services. How do you have the confidence that the software will do what we intended it to do? So that's part that Building Smart International offers those services, and we are relying on that. The middle part is the national standards, and we have a place for that. So through the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund, we created the IDM, which is that authoritative standard. That's where this governance comes in, right? This is something that we know that we can update on a regular basis. We have agreement, there is a process to do that, however is going to be done. Then we have the US Bridge Data Dictionary, which is a software mapping tool, and then the IDS, which is the validation tool. All of that at the national level that every state can use. But that's not the end of the story, right? So you have your state standards. You still have to create your modeling and your CAD standards. You know, we talked about level of development, all those different things. Perhaps you may want to create an information delivery specification that is specific for the project, right? And then you have to come up with your contract deliverables. What are those requirements? So all those pieces of information and all these types of standards come together as what will facilitate model is legal document, or what I like to say now better, model is legal deliverables, right? So just a really brief overview of what we mean when we say we have created this framework to enable mold. And I'm gonna pass it back to Cheryl.
Okay, so with that, phase 1 of the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund is coming to an end. Said we were in year 5, so I wanted to take a minute to talk about the transition to phase 2. So first of all, why do we even need a phase 2? We have an infrastructure pooled fund, and we'll talk about that. The phase 1 effort, as you heard, performed fundamental work. It was the first of its kind for open data standards for the US bridge industry. As we've mentioned, phase 1 focused on one use case, one IDM, and one IDS. These were developed again for a very specific data exchange, and that was designed to construction. So phase 2 will develop open data standards for additional use cases based on the process we learned in phase 1. So there will be more IDMs, more IDSs, perhaps a design to fabrication exchange or construction to asset management for bridges and structures. So phase one's ending in January. Phase two will begin in February. The solicitation is currently open and can be found on the pooled fund website. And what some of the objectives are is we've come up with 3 potential work tasks. The first is to advance the work on developing the national open data standards. There'll be a robust assessment to identify what that high priority data exchange is based on benefits and usefulness to the state DOTs and the industry. The process identified in phase one that Alexa went through is exactly what will be used to develop the corresponding information delivery manuals, information delivery specifications, and the appropriate unit test suites for software providers. The second task involves providing pilot project support to state DOTs. This would include developing training outlines on topics such as the basics of Open BIM's data standards, preparing, exporting, reviewing, and validating IFC files, importing and reviewing files in Open BIM model viewers. And then the third task is related to supporting external collaboration. The focus would be engaging with industry, AASHTO, and other efforts with related activities. And that leads us specifically to the work being done in the infrastructure pooled fund. So what's the difference between phase one and phase two and the BIM for infrastructure pooled fund? So we got a pretty graph for you. There's no doubt that there's some overlap between the efforts. However, each has its primary objective and tasks. Here we use the Venn diagram to graphically represent those areas that have a common focus and the areas that are specific to each pooled fund. Fundamental to both is establishing a data dictionary, engaging with software vendors, and supporting implementation. While the BIM for bridges is very bridge and structure centric, the infrastructure is everything but, and that's a big lift. Phase one of the bridge pooled fund focused on design to construction and establishing a standard for bridge semantic and geometric information exchanges. The infrastructure pooled fund is taking a much broader approach, and it's focused on guidelines and capturing states of the practice. They'll dive into specifics during their upcoming presentation. And you'll probably start to see this graph a lot. This map shows the states that are involved in one or both of the pooled funds and some of the key objectives. The executive committees for each of these pooled funds are starting to have regular meetings to discuss topics that need to be addressed jointly and establish the appropriate leads to ensure there will not be duplication of effort or confusion. For example, meeting with and supporting the vendors is a critical component of implementing an open BIM data standard for the US industry. We've been engaging with software vendors since the first year of the BIM Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund effort, and early years were more focused on awareness, education, and getting buy-in. Now the focus is much more technical and software development focused. We want to ensure that moving forward, the vendors continue to have a single, reliable voice on where we're headed and what's important to the US. We see this as a fundamental point in advancing the state of the practice. And I'm sure our time is up.
Thank you very much. Next up, we're going to have the update for the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. That will be John Wilkerson, Michael Kennerly, Mona Ketterl, and Abhishek Bhargava. Okay. Did I get that right, or did I butcher it?
So correction, Mona's not up here with us. That was I'm presenting with her on Wednesday, so everybody show up. That'd be great, but just the three of us.
Number one, you're probably going to see a lot of duplication in the slides that we're going to show from the previous two presenters. So I think one of the things that will help you understand is the ideal of collaboration and cooperation between the two groups. I'm going to cover the first part, and our agenda is essentially to talk about the background, where we came from, why we're here. And then the next part will be talking about where we are today, and the last part will be talking about where we're going tomorrow. And so I'm going to cover the first part. A little bit about the project background. Some of you may have seen the National Strategic Roadmap, and if you haven't, just slap it into Google and take a look at it. And for those states that are really trying to get their arms around this, I would really suggest you download that document and take a look through it. It's got some really good information in it. But one of the things it talks about is, we need to form a transportation pooled fund, that will drive this nationally. And that was one of the reasons behind the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. We needed to focus on life cycle data, and you've heard that talked about a lot. Managing the assets throughout their life cycle, being able to leverage information in ways that we haven't been before, and being able to take advantage of technology. And then obviously if you're going to start to do all that, you have to have data standards. You have to be able to use the tools that we have to be able to accomplish the mission. And when we look at that, one of the things that we've been talking about this afternoon is, the two pooled funds in particular, the BIM for Bridges Pooled Fund and now the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund. And you can take a look up there on the screen and you'll see that the BIM for Bridges Pooled Fund has been around for a while. They've got 5 years under their belt, and like Cheryl was saying, now they're working on their second round. And really what that does for BIM for Infrastructure is it really gives us a model that we can utilize and leverage as we do BIM for Infrastructure, because it is going to involve a lot more than just roads. You're talking about bringing in right-of-way and soils and all the other disciplines that are involved in project development. And so, in the ability to incorporate all of that and the time it's going to take to incorporate all of that, is going to take a significant effort. As you've seen here from the previous slide, we've got common areas of focus, in terms of the data dictionary, information delivery manuals, software vendor engagement. And again, I think that's important that you see that there's a collaboration and a commonality between what the two pooled funds are doing. And really when you take a look at the pooled fund concept, it's really about bringing states together to solve problems. And a lot of you are here, and I was listening this morning to, some of the comments as to what they were hoping to get out of the IHEEP conference. And a lot of it was just information. They wanted to be able to learn what they didn't know, and maybe to hear from other states what they're doing, and maybe able to leverage that when they go back home. Well, that's the same concept behind a pooled fund. Is to be able to bring states together, work on a common issue, and then be able to share that back out beyond just the pooled fund states. And when we looked at this slide, one of the reasons why we wanted to show it was that ideal of being able to give folks a grasp of just how important this topic is. When you look at the number of slides that are either blue, light blue, or hashed, that's a significant representation of the United States. That really shows the interest in what's going on right now in digital delivery. And we thought that was important because, we're always looking to get more states involved. And even for those states that are involved in the pooled fund, to get them more engaged, maybe in the meetings if they're not already. But the reality is this topic has a lot of interest nationally. We talk a lot about, when we were forming this thing, there was a lot of concern about, there's a number of activities that are going on, and how are we going to be able to leverage all that? How are we going to be able to make sure that we're not duplicating effort and being able to bring all of that intelligence that's already at work on this topic, bring that together? And so one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to align with EDC 6, the FHWA, data governance framework, the BIM workflows, AASHTO, the AASHTO-WARE effort. And if you guys, I don't know if they're going to do a presentation, but, AASHTO-WARE is doing some really great things if you don't know about it, And one of the things that we would like to do is be able to leverage that in this effort. But then there's the NIBS effort that's going on and others that we're all trying to bring in. the AASHTO JTCEES work that's been done. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next presentation, but also the involvement with Building Smart International, and trying to make sure that we have a voice at that table. We're able to shape that, that schema in ways that benefits the United States, and being able to bring all of that into the pooled fund so that we're leveraging work that's already done and taking advantage of it to help us move this forward. You look at this one, and, again, you've seen a similar one earlier that talked about stakeholder engagement. And really what that means is that when you talk about BIM for bridges, when you talk about the FHWA's effort, and when you talk about BIM for infrastructure, what we're really trying to do is leverage as much stakeholder engagement as possible. Because the reality is, without that stakeholder engagement, we're not going to be successful. And so, you'll see that in our slides, you'll see that in the other slides, because we all realize without that, this is not going to move forward. Again, one of the things that we're looking at is the industry, engagement. And again, it's nice to talk about we're going to collaborate, we're going to do all that stuff, but you have to be intentional about it. And so one of the things that we've done is we've tried to develop, a specific individual that's going to be working with each of those groups, in order to bring that information back to the pooled fund, help us know where they're going, and make sure they know where we're going. So again, so that we can align our efforts in order to help us move this forward. And then our team, the BIM Launch Alliance team, we've got two members up here on the stage with me, and I'm going to turn this over to John at this time to take over and go to the next stage.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So I'm going to get into the objectives and some of the key outcomes that we're hoping to have over the 5-year process. So really, we started out looking at, we're looking at road modeling, and we're looking at all those other disciplines other than bridge that really impact our road networks. And we're really trying to build and complement the work that's already been done by the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pooled Fund. So what we did, we started out looking at a process map. We built off their process map. Abhishek will get into more details with that later. But we looked at 4 project types, and one of the key focuses was to make sure that in the project types we looked at, we captured the 85th percentile of work. So in here, 2 of these work types were rehab or resurfacing types of work. So we've mapped those out, and now we're really starting to look at identifying those data models that we need so that we can solve those problems that we all talked about earlier. Looking at the tools that are used, we're getting ready to put out a survey looking at these different exchanges across the life cycle of the asset, and really starting to pull those back in, looking at the data exchanges, trying to pinpoint which ones we want to look at and map out further, and then to really build out that data interoperability that we all need. We're coordinating with software vendors like Mike already pointed to, and the standard development organizations. So really, when you look at all the things that we need to do, as was noted earlier, it's pretty massive. We broke down into work areas. We have a digital workflow work area that's really looking at the process maps, looking at how we actually do our work, trying to rethink it like we talked about earlier. Forget about the plans, let's focus on what we can do if we're exchanging data and models. Then we're going to build that and take that into these digital data flows and information exchanges and information management processes. So we can really start to standardize why we call things what we call them, kind of come to a consensus or like I like to say sometimes, agree to disagree. And then we're going to start building out that stakeholder engagement like Mike already talked about. But we have specific targeted outcomes from that and specific folks that we've identified to help us engage with those groups. And then Becky Jelm's on board to really help us really get into that BIM deployment enablement. We're developing the clearinghouse. We're developing a website. We're hoping to house a lot of things there. These start to form the chapters of the guidebook that we talked about earlier. There'll be a chapter kind of on each, and they might expand. There might be more chapters. We all know how AASHTO, Green Books, and other guidebooks come out. They tend to expand with time. So really, one of the concepts that we wanted to convey today is this concept of charging the batteries, right? So these batteries are all different sizes. You know, think of about it, you know, you got the 50-volt battery that powers your lawnmower. You got the AAAs and AAs that maybe power your headlamp or the other things that allow you to see. And then you got those little coin batteries. So some of these are bigger than others. What you see here is we've shown the work that we've done to date, really focusing on year one, but we want to build out this concept so that we can kind of engage with different groups, and everybody tends to understand what we're doing, because these batteries all work in parallel in series, right? And that's how we're going to, if we charge these areas, if we charge the requirements for a BIM process, if we start to figure out what data tools we need, if we start to figure out how to make those exchanges more readily accessible, we're going to get to more of an open BIM and more of a data interoperability process. So we're really trying to make sure we keep the light on this battery as we move forward. So getting back to the guidebook, we're publishing a guidebook yearly based off of the living drafts that we started this year. A lot of them are living drafts, right? That's really taking the current state of practice out of the industry, really taking some of the stuff JTCEES has already done, and really kind of trying to explain how to use that a little bit more. And then pull that into a guidebook. And as we go through the years, we're going to add in some evidence-based drafts from feedback from the states and the agencies that are using those tools. So really, if you're starting to use this stuff, reach out to us, let us know what's working, what's not, because that's really how we improve and we move the industry forward. And then we're going to couple that with these BIM deployment tools that IHEEP will get in a little bit more detail, that are really those data tools, those template libraries, or the data dictionaries that we need to really start talking about these things in similar ways. And so then we're going to release that on a yearly cycle every year for 5 years. And as we go, you know, Mike and I were talking about this earlier, how frequently would we potentially ballot this to make this a little bit more usable by the states. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Abhishek, who's going to get in a little bit more of the details.
Okay, a little bit more of a deep dive now. So this section, we're going to talk about what we are doing in year one, what we have accomplished so far in the first 6 months, and what we are going to do for the remaining 6 months of this year. So our year starts from April to April, and April 2023 is when we started. So the main goal over the 5 years for this pool fund is data interoperability. It's to basically get the data from planning to survey, to design, to construction, to asset management, and essentially back from asset management over to planning, so that any as-built infrastructure in terms of information about those assets can actually again be reused in planning. So it's about that data pipeline that we are trying to create across the asset lifecycle phases. That's essentially the goal. So in order to achieve that goal, we have basically focused on 3 types of questions that we are trying to address. The first one is, let's define those process steps. How do we go from each one of those steps, from planning to survey to design to construction? What are those digital process steps, those digital workflows that we are talking about? The second piece we are trying to define is, what is the data that is getting created at each of those steps? And where is it getting captured? In the data models, in the plan sheets, in the documents? Is it structured data? Is it unstructured data? Is it LiDAR data? Is it photogrammetry data? Is it imagery data? How is it getting collected? What are the specifications of that data at each one of those steps? That's what we call the data dictionary. It's not just a data dictionary that comes out of one application, because there are many applications that are essentially getting used across that entire life cycle. So we are basically creating a data dictionary for each of the applications that are essentially used in that whole life cycle. And there can be many such applications as far as that is concerned. That's what we call a data models catalog. We've all heard the term data governance. The first thing we think about when we talk about data governance is we should manage data as an asset. In order to manage data as an asset, you actually have to have not only a data dictionary, that's only one of the artifacts that we are thinking about. We also need to have a data models catalog, all the different data models that are getting created during the life cycle of the asset. We also need to have a data assets catalog that uniquely identifies, I have my data assets that are roads, that are bridges, tunnels, culverts. The value of my roads is $100 million to my state DOT, so that you can prioritize and invest in that particular data asset. That's what we talk about when we talk about documenting the data that is getting captured throughout that life cycle phase. And then the third piece is the how, in terms of how is that information going to get from one place to the other, and the role of the standards, and that's where the role of interoperability becomes absolutely critical. So that's the third part that we are focusing on. And this is where, again, that information delivery manual process that Alexa was talking about was essentially what we are following. And it's very, very similar to what was talked about in the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund, with only one key difference, which is we are focused on the roads and the major disciplines associated with roads as opposed to the bridges and structures, but we want to align both the deliverables together. So that's kind of the goal. Okay, so how does that look? John talked about the digital workflow infographic. On the next slide, I'll actually show the digital infographic that's similar to what Alexa showed earlier with the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund creating. And we are trying to align and, again, complement those. But this is a very high-level representation that we have tried to put together just to kind of illustrate what this pool fund is essentially focusing on. So the first thing we are looking at is, in order to achieve our goal of getting the data across from the planning to asset management and then back, we need to look at the processes, which is the BIM workflows, the digital processes. We need to look at the data models and the exchanges. That's the second swim lane there. And then we need to look at the tools and technology that are going to basically help us get there. When we look at the processes, the digital workflow, a process map is the first thing that we would like to identify. The second piece is when we talk about getting the data from project planning to asset management and back, it all starts with project planning, but when we start the project planning, often we are doing rehabilitation, replacement, reconstruction projects, and you're working on existing assets. Sometimes information comes for that project planning from the asset management systems. For new construction projects, obviously, we are starting new. So starting with that end in mind, starting with those GIS systems, those asset systems, pulling the data back over into the planning systems, doing that preliminary scoping, identifying and associating the projects with the assets as per the ISO 19650, the information management standard, where you're creating the project information model and the asset information model and connecting them is the first step, and that's what we're recognizing here. Then that after this step, we can bring in all the other digital delivery process steps into place, where essentially the survey, the design, the model as a legal document, the construction models, and the digital as-builts come in. And all those models are residing in that middle layer. And the bottom layer, which the tools are essentially what we're using to build those models, to store the data for those models. And in all this picture, the common data environment comes in. But interestingly, it's not just one common data environment that's used during digital delivery. There are multiple other common data environments that are used on the asset management side, and the GIS side, as well as in the project planning side. And we have to have that interactivity across the board. To govern this ecosystem of data models and tools, there is a data governance process needed. That is where policies and procedures come in. That's where standards come in. And there are issues associated with exchanges, and that's where legal issues are some things that we are looking into. We are also looking at developing those IDMs. Now here I want to highlight the HEEP data integration framework, one of those high priority data exchanges that even the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund was talking about. There were about 77 high value data exchanges that were identified as part of the HEEP data integration framework project that went on from 2019 to 2022. It's in its second phase right now. They're building APIs, and they identified all kinds of data exchanges. We are focused on the roads data exchanges that came out in that pool fund, in that HEEP data integration framework. And we are basically identifying how many of those data exchanges we need to look at and which IDMs do we need to create. Again, very similar to what the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund is doing in terms of the processes that they're following. Then we are certainly starting to look at some of the key important elements that are focused today in terms of the signing and sealing of these data models. And it's not just the construction contract model, it's all of these data models. How can you digitally sign and seal these data models? How do you trust the data in these data models? How can you certify these data models that are created during the asset lifecycle phase? That's what we're talking about. So on the right, you've already seen the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund present the bridge lifecycle roadmap. If you go to the website, you also will find the design to construction process map that they have created. And one of the things that the BIM for Infrastructure Pool Fund did was we try to follow what they have done in terms of basically identifying the models, in terms of the styling and the nomenclature, and then basically create this infrastructure roadmap on the left for roads data. And then ensure that some of the steps for bridges, we are actually referencing the work that they have done so that it's very complementary in that sense. Ultimately, the cycle, I think Trisha mentioned this earlier, it's that whole asset life cycle that we are talking about. In this case, this pool fund is focused on that roads data. So when we talk about planning, we think about what data in the planning systems is associated with roads, what data in the road design system is associated with roads when it comes to roadway geometry model, when it comes to the traffic data, when it comes to drainage and utilities data. Where is it getting captured in various data models? How does it traverse into even linear referencing systems and GIS systems? And how does that actually then make its way into the operations and maintenance systems? That's the life cycle for any single data asset in your data catalog that you're actually trying to create so that you can govern that particular data asset, and that's what this pool fund is focused on. So when you put all of those data models together from that middle layer, this is, again, a very, very simplistic representation of what those data models may look like. But a key thing to note is ISO 19650 talks about project information models and asset information models. And asset information models, they often talk about geospatial systems being used and GIS standards being used for creating asset information models. And as far as project information models are concerned, it's essentially project, what survey we did, what design models we created, and all of those data models here. And the one that's highlighted in the middle, which is the construction data model swim lane, is the digital as-bills. Again, EDC 6 is what we are looking at there, with what data is getting captured in the digital as-bills, how can we extract that information to update certain data models. One of the common things between this pool fund and the BIM for Bridges pool fund is, if you look at all of these data exchanges, you'll come up with like 50 or 60 of them, probably more. But the focus always needs to be one or two of these data models in terms of data exchanges that you need to kind of start looking at in terms of the IDMs that you're going to start developing. But like the BIM for Bridges and Structures Pool Fund is doing in phase 2, they're identifying which data exchanges they want to prioritize. This pool fund is basically building the IDMs to basically say, here are all the data exchanges that are going to be associated with roads. Let's figure out which ones we're going to prioritize and at a high level describe them in the description definitions that we have. We are looking at what the states are doing, and this is an example from Florida DOT, where essentially you are, and many other states are doing this, Connecticut is doing that, I've seen some other states do this, where essentially you are creating digital information models today. You are creating intelligent CAD models today, where the CAD models are actually more structured in how they're being set up. Whether it's the traffic tools that are shown here, where you're actually identifying even the roadway alignments, the station and offset, and the width of the pavement marking and things like that, or whether it is information about your signs, your striping, or whatever else that you're capturing, there is a lot more intelligence that we are adding, a lot more structure that we are adding now. And this is what we are actually going to leverage. This is one part of doing BIM, better information modeling, building information modeling, better information management, whatever you want to call it. Ultimately, it's about managing the data in a more systematic, structured, reliable, trustworthy, and organized manner. And that's what this is, something that we rely on. This is what we call a data model. And it's not just structured data model, it's even unstructured and semi-structured data documents and everything. Once you have data in this kind of models in this format, where you're actually able to identify the specific objects that are geometric objects and associate the properties associated with it, identify the information that you're going to capture with it, that's the level of information need that we have against all of these models. We can export them using standards like IFC, and that's where the role of IFC becomes important. Whether it's a system like Rhino, as in this case that we are showing here, where you have pulled that information into the system using IFC, or whether it is an Esri or GIS system, where you're essentially pulling information from the digital design models into the GIS models here. And that IFC standard actually allows you to, again, organize this a little bit more, but then so are many other standards from Open Geospatial Consortium, like the OGC standards for InfraGML, City GML, they also do the same things, and those are the kind of things that this pool fund is also looking at. There is a presentation on Wednesday where the AGIST pool fund, which is the Applications of Enterprise GIS and Transportation pool fund, another pool fund in the mix here, 18 states part of it. One of the states, Tennessee DOT, defined a use case. and only one use case was a BIM GIS integration use case, which was to actually take data from roadway geometry data models and identify information for lane width, shoulder width, median width, presence of sidewalks, crosswalks, and pull all of that information into a LRS system, into a linear referencing system, into a GIS system, so that you can do highway performance monitoring system reporting, which is a federal reporting requirement. That is the one use case that pool fund worked on, and actually it used software like the Bentley systems, the Esri systems, the IFC standard, and the findings of it is what we will actually share at that time. But these are the kind of things we are also looking at in this pool fund to ensure that we are leveraging the work that has been done by the other activities in the industry. So with that said, I'll close with two slides here probably. One is, there is a website, and I put in both websites here in terms of resources for the BIM for Bridges Pool Fund as well as the BIM for Infrastructure Pool Fund. Both of these websites have a lot of complementary information material. There's a glossary that both websites have. There are bridge terms on one. There are roads and data governance and data entity terms. We are looking to combine those things as we start working together. There are a lot of NCHRP reports and a lot of other documents mentioned here. On the BIM for Infrastructure website as well, we are talking about building a clearinghouse, which will basically be a searchable database of all kinds of BIM-related documents from the industry. Bottom line, these are the resources that we are actually looking to combine and ensure that they complement each other in terms of all the data that is available. And the last slide is the questions for us. So thank you.
All right, thank you guys very much. So to wrap this up, we've got Mike Kennerly, and he's going to give the AASHTO Committee on Design Joint Technical Committee for Electronic Engineering Standards. This one's John's, right?
You know, the bad part of being the last speaker of the day is, you know, half the people aren't paying attention to what you say, and the other ones are just trying to figure out where they're supposed to meet their friends after this is all over. So I could sit up here and do Mary Had a Little Lamb, and you guys wouldn't know. But what I am going to do is try to give you a brief overview of the Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards. It's been referenced a number of times before. The committee oh, okay. Now I got to go back. I chair the committee. Jennifer Lloyd from Tennessee DOT is a vice chair. One of the things you'll notice is that we've got 17 states, but one of the things that was different about this committee and took us a long time to get together was the idea that it was cross-discipline. And for a technical committee, that was kind of unique at the time. But because of the subject matter that we were talking about, I knew it was important that we involved other disciplines beyond just highway design. And so, you know, we've got design, construction, bridges and structures, and maintenance. You know, and then the other thing that we thought was going to be important was involving the ACEC. So we've got, you know, 2 consulting firms. And then we also wanted to get Bentley, Autodesk, Trimble, and AGC involved, because all of those are players in this, and all of those have a voice in what we're trying to accomplish. You know, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you've got the slides later. But this just kind of gives you our scope, our mission, you know, and then our vision. And really, you know, what we were trying to do was kind of lay that groundwork for states that were making that transition from 2D to 3D to model as a legal document. You know, some of the things that the committee has been able to accomplish is, you know, the 2019 resolution to adopt IFC. And out of that resolution, 2 things came. Number 1 was that we wanted the creation of a joint committee that kind of oversaw all of these different efforts, and that's JSTAN, and that's the Joint Standardization Committee. And so that one is up and running. Right now, it doesn't have a chair, but it is up and running, and the ideal is that group is intended to bring all of the other groups to the table and make sure that we're all playing nice, number 1, but that we're all collaborating and cooperating with each other and where we're going. You know, then the other part of that was to join Building Smart, which we did. We officially became a member of Building Smart last fall. We've been able to participate now in the last 2 summits, well, actually the last 3 summits, Montreal, Rome, and then the one in Norway. But the one in Rome, I was actually able to attend, and you know, the thing that we were after was we wanted a voice, we wanted a seat at the table, we wanted to be able to influence the schema, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, as they developed it with us in mind. And it was interesting because BSI now has a new CEO. And one of the things that he asked was, when I got there, was could he have 30 minutes with me to talk about, his vision and all of that. And so when we got together, what I was surprised at, Ian Howe and Clyde, they sat down and they both got out notepads. And they began to quiz me, on what was important to the U.S., what things that we want to see out of this. And so for the next hour, not half an hour, we actually talked about how we wanted to help see this shaped for the U.S. industry moving forward. And I really appreciated that because, like I said, that was our first meeting with them. And for the new CEO to sit down and spend that much time trying to get a good sense of where the U.S. was going and to make sure that we were, a part of the effort moving forward, I thought was a really great sign of the cooperation that I think we're going to have with BSI as we move forward. The other part was, we've done a couple of things, in terms of developing guidance. We've got a level of development spec. John Wilkerson was greatly involved in that. Model as legal document, George was leader of that group and has a lot of good work and has accomplished a lot of good work in that. We're also developing guidance on the integration of BIM and asset management. Bill Pratt's leading that up. And then, we've also got a transition guide. How do you make this move? Level 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth, and what it takes for you, what you should consider as you move forward. And then we also had a webinar series. We paused during the summer, but we're going to get that up and going again. And that was really intended to help bring people in who weren't a part of the committee but had an interest in this effort and wanted to know, how to get started and where to go. If you go to the website, and this is one of those things we thought was really important to share. If you go to the website, you can find the documents that we've already completed. So again, we don't want people feeling like, they're out there alone and that there's no assistance. The ideal is that we're here to make sure that we all move forward. And so a lot of those things that, like how do you review a plan? What's required for a model of a legal document, the level of development spec, all of that information is already in, our website, and you can go there anytime you want to. You can, one of the things we joke about is the importance of R&D, rip off and duplicate. The idea that, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. You just find something that you like that another state's done and you duplicate it. And so, when you look at the website, you're going to find some things that maybe you guys can tailor to your agencies. And this just shows a little bit more about that. And so what's next? And I think a lot of what's next was talked about throughout this morning and this afternoon. One of the things that we know is that the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund cannot create AASHTO standards. They can pass that information, but they can't create it. And so what the Joint Technical Committee on Electronic Engineering Standards is going to do is be that conduit between the BIM for Infrastructure Pooled Fund and AASHTO. So as guidance is developed that John talked about, it will come through and get vetted by this committee, and then this committee will take it to the Committee on Design for adoption, similar to what you saw with BIM for bridges. But then as we started to talk about where do we go from here, again, we looked at what we've accomplished, and so when we had BIM Week, one of the things that was intentional about that was we had updates, kind of like you're getting updates right now, from a number of different efforts and a number of different, programs that are going on so that we could get a feel for the landscape to see where we can fit in and where some of those holes are that we think we can fill. And one of them, as you heard from an earlier panel discussion, was on, developing guidance for that design to construction handover. And you heard from, members from construction and other groups about some of the things that they need in regard to model as a legal document and moving that forward. And one of the things that, we often forget about is, we were guilty of it in Iowa. We always think about, okay, we got to get the model out to construction. We got to get the model out to construction. That's really great. But there's also that step between developing that model and getting it out to construction, and that's bidding. How do you set this up so that a contractor has the information they need in the format they need it for the bidding process. One of the things that you have to recognize is they're getting quotes, from subs, and are doing it in a rather rapid fashion. They need to be able to get information out to the subs, and they need to be able to get that information back in terms of a bid. And one of the things that when we were developing our pilot, and we were talking with the AGC about this, they said, well, okay, so Mike, so what's the bidding package going to look like? And it was that, that infamous, oh my gosh, we didn't think about that moment. And so we had to work with them to start looking at, okay, so if you need information from in this format, what do we need to give you? And so the ideal is maybe we need to start looking at this in terms of standardizing it for the US so that the contracting industry has a consistent format and knows what to expect. And so that you guys, again, don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so like I said, we were looking at how do we make that construction or that design to construction handover a little bit more efficient and a little bit more effective in terms of how we move this forward. The other one is that, there's a lot, look around the room, and, there's a lot going on in terms of emerging technology, and a lot of times, we'll do something as a one-off, but the ideal is what we're trying to create is a digital workflow. When we talk about digital delivery, we're not just talking about trying to create the model as a legal document. Model as a legal document is an outflow, an outcome of a digital workflow. And so the question is, we've got all these things that are going on that are changing the information that we have, how it's gathered, how it's used. How do we bring that into the workflow? So that it's a part of what we do, not just a one-off. And so we want to start looking at the emerging technologies that are out there and begin to figure out how to bring that into the game. Again, one of the things that we want to do is talk about asset management, and you've heard a lot about that. And that handover from once you get the digital as-built done, how do you get that information back into the system? And again, it's one of those gaps in the process. A lot of work's going on. There are some promising, applications out there that will help with that. But the reality is the digital as-built is just a holding vessel. That's all it is. You're not going to go back to the digital as-built 20 years from now and get information out of it. So you've got to be able to harvest the information that you want as an agency to be able to manage your assets over their life cycle. You got to be able to get that information out of the digital as-built and then put that into the various, databases that you have. And again, that's a gap right now in terms of the process. And so one of the things that we want to look at, or maybe look at, is how do we close that gap? How do we get the information out of the as-built back into the system, some of which will be GIS, we know that, but some of it's going to be legacy systems. And so how do we get that information back in there so that people can use that data in terms of decision-making over the life cycle of that asset? And then this last one, it gets to, again, the information in digital as-builts. And then what information do you want in a digital as-built? You heard earlier about, from contractors and others, in terms of you want us to create a digital as-built, or even your own staff create a digital as-built. How do we put that in there? And then again, how do we bridge that gap from the digital as-built into asset management? And again, that's an important step that we have to cover. Now, when we formed this committee, it was, George Lukes was one of those that has been on the committee since its beginning, and when George looked at, the vision, the mission, and all of that, he politely said, this is mission impossible, because, a lot of this was still early on in terms of where we were going. And so I've always kept this in here as kind of an ode to George, but as we've gone through the years, we've really moved from mission impossible to mission possible, because we have been able to develop guidance, and we are developing more guidance. And we want to be able to provide that to states so that you're not out there trying to reinvent the wheel. And that's the hard part about this, not knowing how to start, not knowing where to go. And so part of our mission is to move from mission impossible to mission possible, not just for our committee, but for your agencies as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody. Great first day. Had some great discussions. So you know, right after this, well, 5:30, we're going to be meeting sort of in the hallway for a vendor reception. Please join us. And we'll probably use this room as well. Come on in and see your vendors. Like I said, we can't do this without our sponsors. So join us for having a cocktail and some appetizers, and visit your sponsors. Thank you, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.